Hello, it's Monday afternoon, and I'm ready to do another chapter in Where's the Rest of the Body? Uh, we've made quite a bit of progress to date, and the last time we were talking, you'll recall that a couple of the constables had to go and do interviews, and they learned some things from the interviews. One of the things they learned was the name of another person. It's quite a mouthful. It's Henrietta Harriet Hackleby, HHH. My goodness, thank heavens we don't have to call her that through the rest of the book. We're just going to call her Henny. But this has changed things a little bit. Now there's another person there. Now it's another step more complicated. So Petrovic, the chief, is a little concerned because he's trying to find out where are these people? Where is Henrietta Hackleby or Henny? And where is, Nancy Featherston? What happened? They're pretty suspicious now that Nancy Featherston is still alive. That's what everything would indicate, but they can't find her. So the chief is talking to his constable and said, listen, do you have any ideas? And Constable Franklin says, we can contact the Canada Census Office in Toronto to find her whereabouts. And they tried some of that, and they're not having a lot of success. As a matter of fact, the Canadian census of 1931 didn't contain either name, so they're struggling here. And they'd also had contacted Chicago, trying to find out if there are any incident reports of problems with someone called Nancy Featherston in 1912, but they were unsuccessful there as well. So they're not sure what they're going to do. They're having trouble. They're struggling. They're trying to find out any more information about the people behind these two names. And the only thing that they did find out, and Petrovic mentioned it, he said, by the way, I did get a call from Chicago, and they told me that Johnny Polizzi and Ernie Stangio were in a jail cell at the time of the fire for violating parole, which is what Johnny Polizzi had suggested earlier in an interview. So they're kind of spinning their wheels right now. They're not sure what's going to happen. Well, it's the weekend, and Friday night, Georgie and Joel were talking, and Georgie said to Joel, she said, you have that ability to contact essences. Have you talked to Walter about this? Maybe he's heard of somebody that died. Maybe he can put you in communication with whoever died in that fire so many years ago. So he tries to contact Walter. Well, Walter is an essence or a ghost. By the way, let me introduce you to someone who I have now is attending this session with me. I don't know whether you can see him or not, but there he is. That's Walter. Actually, Walter's disguised himself. I don't know whether you can see his eyes very well. I guess you can't see his eyes yet, but he does have eyes. But Walter's in disguise. A good ghost doesn't like people to know who he really is. And of course, a good ghost doesn't wander around looking like that in a white sheet, because I don't know whether you know much about ghosts or not. I don't believe in them, but I've only seen one. My wife saw the same ghost. I think I mentioned it maybe many, many programs ago. And it's just kind of like, it wasn't white, it was just sort of, I don't know whether you would call it a shade or whether you would call it a foggy area or how to describe it. But it was in this one house, the first house that we lived in. And you'd get up in the middle of the night and you'd see this thing. And I suspect I know who it was. They weren't malevolent at all, but they were there. And it wasn't just our imagination, because several years after we moved, someone from that house mentioned that they'd seen a ghost in that house. It was a ghost of an older woman. No ill intentions there. Anyway, that was a segue. I stepped away from the story. Let me step back into it. So, young Constable Franklin, decides that he'll go with his friend Georgie out to the farm, the Featherston farm, to see if they can make contact. This is after they've talked to Walter. Walter had told them, he said, there's something out there. I don't know what it is, but I know there's something there. So they went out and tried to make a contact. Well, let's see what happened when they went out there. It was a beautiful Saturday afternoon. And when they got out there, they looked at the burned down building. The first floor was still there. I mean, just the floor of the building, and they got some sticks and they tapped on the floor to make sure they didn't fall through. And when they got about halfway into it, Joel concentrated. He concentrated and tried to think of what he could. He suspected, because of what he heard, that the person that was in there was Henny and not Nancy Featherston. So he said, Henrietta, can you hear me? This is what he's sending as a brainwave, which he then repeats out loud so Georgie can record it. Henrietta, can you hear me? He senses nothing. I have a special ability that enables me to communicate with a troubled spirit. My friend Walter over here, my friend Walter told me he would contact you. He's not alive either, and he also suffered a very terrible death. Well, he's trying to make this contact, and he thought he sensed something. But since he sensed something, he said, I know your full name is Henrietta Harriet Hackleby. And then he did sense something. It was laughter. It was clear that somebody was laughing, but when he turned around, it wasn't Georgie, because he was hearing this in his head. That's not my name, came across him exceptionally clearly. My name is Henrietta Harriet Allenby. They had the wrong name. No wonder they couldn't find it in the census or anywhere else, because this person Hackleby didn't exist, but Allenby does. So he proceeds from there. He communicates with this essence for a few more minutes, trying to get some information that will help him get to the bottom of the matter and solve this murder. Henny communicated to him in detail what had happened the day of the murders. She had arrived from Toronto the evening before to visit the Featherstons. Remember, she'd been brought over from England due to the generosity of Mrs. Featherston. And they had given her a little money. She got to Toronto. She had a job. She'd saved up some money, and she came back to visit them. And she drove back in her Model T Ford. She was very proud of it and wanted to show it to the Featherstons. When Henny arrived, she immediately noticed Nancy's different behavior. Nancy's a couple of years older than her. She said that later that evening when they were by themselves, she said, "Are you feeling okay, Nancy?" "I feel terrific as long as I have a good snort of cocaine," Nancy said. Remember, this story is set, the story we're reading is set in 1933. The events happened in 1911. And believe it or not, cocaine was a popular drug of use at that time. Check it out. It wasn't necessarily illegal. It was by prescription. And of course, this kind of shocks Henny. She said, but you can't tell my mom and dad about me using cocaine. They get extremely upset. They just don't understand. Do you want me to give you some so you can snort too? No, thanks. I'm not into that, Henny replied. Good, said Nancy, because I'm running out. And I don't want you to be around when my supply is gone. Nancy then proceeded to make a lot of derogatory comments about her parents. And she said, I'm going to get even with them. Henny didn't understand this. I mean, she knew her parents and they were wonderful people. They had brought her over from England. They'd set her on a path where she could have a good life. Anyway, going on to the next day, the morning of October the 3rd. That was the morning of the fire. At breakfast that morning, Mistress Featherston said to Nancy they'd have made arrangements for her to go to a sanatorium in the Muskoka region. They were concerned about her use of drugs. They didn't want her going back to Chicago to DePaul University. And Nancy just went ballistic, and she screamed at them, "You're all evil!" She jumped up. "You all will be punished!" She raced from the room. Henny continued with her story. She said, Nancy seemed to have settled down by lunchtime, but she still had a strange look on her face. The Featherstons often had wine with their lunch, and so Nancy proposed a toast. She said, "To the future." This was Nancy's toast. It was really kind of a strange gesture by Nancy. They all kind of wondered, but they took the wine, and within minutes, both of the Featherstones were on the floor dead. Nancy had poisoned the wine. Since Henny had only taken a tiny sip, she had not died, but she was incapacitated. And she was semi-conscious. Henny said, I watched as Nancy dragged the bodies of her parents out the rear door of the home into a nearby workshop. Then she returned to me. She bound me, gagged me, and told me I would burn in hell. Then she told me she was sorry her parents had died because she wanted to torture them before they died. Because they were so evil. And Henny's still thinking, why are they so evil? They were so good to me. Anyway, she left Henny bound and gagged on the dining room floor for a couple of hours. When she returned to where I was, this is Henny speaking, she had my car keys and my suitcase. She told me she was going to set the house on fire, and she hoped it would take a long time to burn so that I would suffer a lot. She was crazy. Suddenly she was gone from my mind. Remember, all of this is not verbal. This is all communication via brain waves back and forth, right? And then he's saying it out loud so it can be recorded. He was overwhelmed by the story, right? He didn't know what to do next. He wasn't sure. It was such an evil tale. And that's, somehow he wasn't sure how, but he realized that they couldn't continue to go looking for Harriet Hackleby because the name was wrong, it was Allenby, and he realized, how could he explain this to Chief Petrovic? How could he tell him he'd been talking to ghosts? Wouldn't work out too well, would it? No? No, he's shaking his head. No, wouldn't work out too well. So that's where we are now. What happens next? You know there'll be lots to follow. Stay tuned. I'll try and get my buddy here to come back again next time. Have a good day.